But without any further ado, I want to turn over to, as I mentioned, one of the co-chairs of the South Asian Politics series here at Harvard and a professor at the Department of Government, Feyaad Ali, who's going to be serving as our moderator. Feyaad, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here. My name is Feyaad Ali. I'm an assistant professor in the government department. Most of my research focuses on democracy and identity in South Asia. So today we're here for a panel about the transition in Bangladesh and its implications. And before we begin to hear from our three wonderful panelists, I'll just give a brief overview of what happened this summer in Bangladesh that sort of sets the tone for this event. So in early July, mass peaceful protests against Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina broke out, primarily led by university students. And the government responded by cracking down, killing almost 400 people and injuring over 20,000. The immediate cause of the protests was a quota system for government jobs that favored descendants of those who fought in the country's war of independence against Pakistan. The students argued that the system was unfair and that positions should be decided on merit. However, other grievances were also underlying the protests as well, including disapproval of the Hasina government's growing authoritarian tendencies, prolonged economic downturn in the country, and reports of corruption. So in August, Sheikh Hasina was ousted and she fled the country. And now there's a caretaker government that's being led by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. With some students who were involved in the protests also being involved in this caretaker government. Yunus, you may know, won the Nobel Prize for his work with the Grameen Bank in microfinance and microcredit. So Hasina's ouster was a huge change for Bangladesh's politics. Hasina, her family, and their party, the Awami League, has either been in power or close to power basically since Bangladesh was founded. And today we're joined by three wonderful panelists to discuss the protests, the change in government, and sort of what this looks like going forward. So I'll just briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll hear from them for some brief remarks before we do a moderated discussion and then open up to a wider Q&A. So first, we'll hear from Dr. Nusrat Chowdhury. She's an associate professor of anthropology at Amherst College. Her first book, Paradoxes of the Popular, Crowd Politics in Bangladesh, was published by Stanford University Press in 2019 and is an ethnography of the crowd. Dr. Chowdhury will focus on unpacking the role of protests and student movements in the region and how to think about it in this context. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Ali Riaz. He's the distinguished professor in the Department of Politics and Government at the Illinois State University. He's published several books on political Islam, Bangladeshi politics, and South Asian politics. And Dr. Riaz will focus on the challenges that face the interim government and the way forward in constructing a democratic state. And then finally, we'll hear from Dr. Daniel Markey. He is a senior advisor on South Asia at the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., and he has worked on and written extensively about security and foreign relations in South Asia, including a book on the links between China and its neighbors and the US-Pakistan relationship. Dr. Markey will focus on the external implications of the transition, specifically the response from the US, China, and India. So without further ado, we'll first have Dr. Chowdhury. Thanks.
Thank you. So in a crowd of slogans and drawings on every possible surface visible to the public in Bangladesh, a graffito stood out. It said simply yet counterintuitively 36 July or 36 July in Bangla. This was one of thousands of bold proclamations that plastered the walls of sidewalks, buildings, flyovers, and train stations during what has been dubbed by many as Bangladesh's monsoon revolution. In fact, Yale is hosting a conversation tomorrow that describes the uprising as the monsoon revolution. The protesters had been logging 31st July, 32nd July, and so forth, leading up to the 36th. The signage signaled the long month of July that witnessed a student demand for quota reforms catapult into a demand for the fall of the regime, or rather its most powerful symbol, Sheikh Hasina, modern South Asia's longest reigning sovereign and the erstwhile Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina was deposed by a mass uprising that turned bigger, angrier, and more defiant as it confronted the excessive violence of the state unleashed on an unarmed citizenry. As the July protest saw its culmination on the 5th day of August, the day of Sheikh Hasina's resignation and departure, it was only fitting that those early days of August were claimed by the fierce and fateful month of July. So my presentation today doesn't offer a strict timeline of the events, but it does draw on some of the themes that the student coordinators and activists have shared during the movement with the media and later in a number of conversations that we had since August 5th, including the one I was a part of yesterday at the University of California, Berkeley. Given we don't have any student representation on this panel, I thought it would be good to channel some of their voices and thoughts wherever possible. So at this point, we know that a movement to reform the reservations or quotas for government jobs became a movement for the resignation of the Prime Minister herself. The quota system is almost as old as Bangladesh itself, instated in 1972 by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. It had gone through a number of changes. Most recently, in 2018, students of public universities protested against the reservation of jobs for the families of freedom fighters by the High Court, which was later scrapped. However, on June 5th, 2024, just a few weeks before the protest started, following the filing of a writ petition by a group of relatives of the war veterans, the High Court of Bangladesh reinstated the controversial quota system, describing the government's decision to scrap the quotas in 2018 as, I quote, unconstitutional, illegal, and ineffective. Students across the country, including those who are not necessarily vying for jobs in the public sector, for example, a lot of private university students, saw in this yet another effort to benefit those allied closely with the ruling Awami League, and the court itself was seen to be very friendly with the regime. And these two photographs, I wanted to put them side by side because, you can see the early days of the quota reform movement, very familiar students, protesting, with sit-ins with slogans written on posters, peaceful protest. And then within a few weeks, you can see that basically Dhaka and many other parts of the country were turned into war zones. So how did a demand for quota reform, sorry, I'm not doing a very good job with this. I'll come to that. Something the New York Times called a bread and butter issue rise to this occasion. For this, a larger context is crucial, one marked by long-standing corruption, crony capitalism, and the violent repression of rights, particularly the right to free speech during the Awami League's 16 years of consecutive rule. This, in addition to the elections of dubious integrity, including the most recent one in January 2024, without the participation of the main political party. The demand for quota reform then, as our panelist, Professor Ali Riaz, has described it early on, was a spark that started the fire. So when I asked how 2024 was different from 2018 to some of the students who participated in both, that was when the last time the students took to the streets with similar demands, a private university student from Dhaka explained, earlier the Prime Minister was seen as a savior. We directly pled with her when the court, for example, gave an unpopular verdict. This time, the usual strategies of condescension didn't seem to work. She appeared more of an autocrat, the student said. She was distant and dismissive. The same student also used the Bangla word upohash, or mockery, to explain the root of their anger. He was, of course, referring to the infamous statement that the former Prime Minister had made, dismissing the students as razakars, a term directly tied with the origin story of the nation, one that has been repeatedly invoked to connote betrayal, as the razakars during the 1971 war were infamous collaborators who betrayed their ethical and ethnic loyalties. This was a major gaffe, as many observers have pointed out. The established language game did not work because razakar is often invoked to kind of dismiss or other whoever is resisting or protesting. And the students turned it on its head by re-signifying the term and describing themselves as such. But this wouldn't be the only gaffe. There were a few more. On July 25th, for example, during a visit to a vandalized metro rail station that the crowds attacked, Sheikh Hasina publicly wept. The backlash was immediate and intense. She seemed to care more about her ambitious development projects than the people of her country, many people thought. Her feelings were read at once, and there's a contradiction there, at once sincere, that she really felt for her signature mega project, and also fake, as in crocodile tears. No matter, the Prime Minister's affective outburst only stoked the feelings of deep distrust and anger. Add to this mix of faux pas the inexplicable and inescapable violence. So we have Abu Saeed, a student at Begum Rokeya University in Rangpur, whose photograph I'm sure you have seen. It has been circulating on social media. Here is Abu Saeed. We'll go back to the other slide. Then there was Mir Mugdho in Uttara, Dhaka, who was offering water to exhausted protesters who were all killed by the police. The internet was shut down, curfew was in place, and the student activists of the regime, the Awami League, attacked ordinary students and citizens by the provocation of those in power. A student described this as living a collective nightmare. So this was the point of no return, as a public university professor said to me. The professors, of course, have been involved with negotiating with the administration to protect their students from the very outset. But now many parents joined in, as did ordinary citizens, political activists, lawyers, and business owners. It is obvious that one of the main factors behind the success of the uprising was the sheer number of people who were defying curfew and joining the protest. In a matter of days, the protests led by the students became a movement of what in Bengali we call Chhatro Janota. It would be interesting to trace when that linguistic shift happened in describing the event, because it would be a powerful marker of when the students generated wider support or garnered wider support from ordinary citizens, described with the term Janota or the masses. But Chhatro Janota, as I've also written in another piece on the 1969 political uprising, is a historically meaningful political formation in this region. The 1969 People's Uprising, or Gano Obhuthan against Ayub Khan's dictatorship, was broadly described as a movement led by Chhatro Janota. This hyphenated identity has been crucial in bringing in political change, as we have seen in 1990 in the anti-Irshad movement, as well as in 2006-2007, when the students it started with the University of Dhaka, they protested against the military-led caretaker government. So this is the 2007 image is from there. So one of the crucial aspects of the July movement is precisely the participation of people from every walk of life, which gave the movement its necessary momentum. This had partly to do with the excessive violence, of course, but also with the core tenet of the movement itself, which one of the student coordinators, which is actually who is actually a special assistant to the chief advisor in the interim government, who described this as non-partisan, apolitical, and post-ideological. And we can discuss these terms, what they might mean in this context. In a place where people are wary and weary of party politics, this was an effective position. We have also seen how the category of student, or chhatro, for example, was differently mobilized by both those supporting and those opposing the movement. For example, while the support of the rickshaw pullers, or let's say Tokai. So, for example, the 1969 photo is of, this character. Basically, now it's an umbrella term for working class poor. Basically, literally means rag picker. Was differently mobilized, but it became it was celebrated sometimes within the movement. There were often efforts to dismiss the protesters as Tokai. And if you see some of the interviews of the students at the time, they would also dismiss the people who were beating them up as Tokai, right? So these different categories were being mobilized, Chhatro, Tokai, and of course Jamaat Shibir, which is now an umbrella term for any kind of Islamist force, which is how the students or the protesters were being dismissed and labeled from the very beginning. So in this context, and in the light of the uprisings that happened before, I mean, there are smaller ones, but these are the ones that are they were powerful enough to make meaningful change. I would like us to contemplate the sanctity of the category of the student itself, its presumed innocence, but also effectiveness as a political subject, and whether it is ultimately tenable as an agent of political change in Bangladesh. And what kind of political mileage does Chhatro as student offer, as opposed to Chhatro Janota, which is this hyphenated identity to describe the masses and vice versa. So indeed, in a post-authoritarian context, this is post-August 5th, we see this tension between what has been dubbed as kind of the revolutionary ethos of the movement led by the masses and the reformist ethos of the interim government. And at this point, I would like to offer some thoughts on the former, that is, the paradoxes of mass politics that this uprising itself has brought up. And I know many of us here have been simultaneously horrified, intrigued, or even maybe tickled a little bit by the images of looting and iconoclasm that came out of Bangladesh after August 5th. There have been comparisons made between what happened in Sri Lanka a few years ago. The two main sites where this happened were Ganobhavan, which was the former Prime Minister's official residence, and Dhaka's famous parliament building, সংসদ Bhavan. So many Bangladeshis within and beyond the country have rightly expressed their indignation at these scenes of destruction, reminding their fellow citizens that this is ultimately public property, so they're destroying things that were made with their own taxpayer money. So as someone who's interested in the culture of mass politics, I believe it's important to explore whether historically in this part of the world we actually experience government property as public property. We know Ganobhavan literally means the people's house or home, whereas almost every foreign, not just foreign, but English language media outlet has described it as Sheikh Hasina's palace. And I think therein lies an irony. The powerful have used government property as its own for a very long time. Even our streets, which are the ultimate, public things, are not really ours when we have to wait in line for hours for VIPs to pass through, and sometimes even ambulances are not spared, right? In this situation, the objects owned by those in power, a power that has a sublime quality, and I use sublime consciously as something that requires distance but also invokes both awe and fear, because of its distance from the people, and they're suffused with the aura of power. That's why touching them, making them one's own, cannot be reduced to their economic value. Surely some people, sold and made a few bucks, but I don't think the enjoyment of it can be reducible to kind of a simple economic calculus. This, of course, doesn't justify mob justice against presumed political enemies, which has been frequent since August 5th. But I think it's important to understand why the crowds who are at one moment glorified can at another moment or instantly vilified, and what we can actually say about the performance of power and the aesthetics of power in our part of the world. And whether a liberal fantasy of the public and private ultimately explains the ways of doing politics in this part of the world. And yet, and I don't want to end there because that would be a one-sided story, the iconoclasm, the looting, the vandalism took place side by side with a heightened level of community cooperation. Neighborhood groups to tackle local crimes, offering surveillance at Hindu temples, students taking on traffic duties and cleaning up and reclaiming the objects pilfered from the parliament building and the residence of the former prime ministers. All those things happened for weeks after August 5th. So to go back to my earlier question, what is the relationship between this reformist ethos and the revolutionary ethos in this particular context? But also more generally, is mass politics always a paradoxical repertoire of revolutionary strategies and reformist impulses? So I'm going to stop there. I have a feeling Professor Riaz has a lot to say about reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. It is really an honor to be here. And I take this opportunity to thank Ashu for inviting me, because on his insistence, and rightly so, I had the pleasure to meet him and work with him on several occasions. Today, what I'm going to talk about, by now, what you have gathered, that there was a popular uprising which led to the, deposing the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, end of an autocratic rule of 15 years, which included 3, what I described as transparently fraudulent elections. All this, we are quite familiar by now with that. But where do we stand now today as we speak, pretty much, with the interim government headed by Professor Muhammad Yunus and the challenges it faces? Bangladesh is familiar with violence. Bangladeshi history is tumultuous. It has experienced one-party state. It has experienced the killing of the presidents, at least 2 of them. We have seen popular uprising in 1990, which we have seen some images before. And we have seen this massive upsurge, unprecedented in the history of Bangladesh. Let me reiterate, it is unprecedented even by Bangladeshi standard. That has led Bangladesh into a situation which I would describe as a critical juncture of its history. After 1971, Bangladesh has never been in this kind of situation. I hope this would be not the repeat in future again. But this is a critical juncture for Bangladesh. The next weeks and months, hopefully not years, would determine where the Bangladeshi state would actually eventually end up. This is not an hyperbole. This is not an exaggeration. My understanding of being very closely watching Bangladeshi politics for at least 3 decades, this is what I have come to a conclusion. Why? Because what Bangladesh is witnessing, and the word reform has been mentioned here, and which I tend to disagree, that this is not a moment of reform. For 2 reasons. Number 1, the reform means just Band-Aid. Band-Aid would not work. Band-Aid would not work because the Bangladeshi state over the last 15 years, all the sectors that you can think of, anything that you can think of, education, health, or for that matter, economy, law enforcement agencies, intelligence, all have been decimated, politicized in such a manner that it is need to be reconstructed. Bangladesh has entered, either it would succeed or not, I don't know, but Bangladesh has entered into a phase they will have to reconstruct their state to begin with. That's why I don't think it is a matter of reform. It is a matter of reconstructing a possible potential democratic state called Bangladesh. The challenges that I see at this point, for the interim government led by Professor Yunus, and not only his government, it is a challenge to the Bangladeshi society in large measure. What are those things? There are some are very imminent one, immediate, today, tomorrow, day after kind of challenges. It's a challenge of stability. What we have witnessed since 5th of August, there has been, the first we have seen the looting kind of thing, which is, I think, despite the fact that I would not condone, but I think that is very natural. If you have lived for 15 years under an autocratic regime where you cannot speak, the first thing that you do actually express yourself in a manner that is demonstrably opposed to that regime. The reason that the Gana Bhavan was looted, because in 1991, after Sheikh Hasina came into power, she, in the parliament, put a law written that this is her personal property. This is her personal property. That was written, put it in a law, and it was agreed by the parliament. So if the people have looted it, should we actually blame them? I don't, unfortunately. I hate to see that the public property has been such a manner been dismantled and looted and all sorts of things, because those are public. But this is a demonstration of public anger to her, because for the 15 years people couldn't speak. 800 people have been killed, or at least most of them were subjected to enforced disappearance. 1,500 plus people were killed in extrajudicial killing. And thousands that we have mentioned over the since 15 July, 800 plus people were killed. 18,000 people were injured. So when they came out and they did this, did I like it? No, I did. But I understood what is going on. What are the challenges? The stability's challenge is this, of course, the visuals that we see in the media. Then we saw the attacks on the minority. Some of them are really horrible attacks. That has been contained. In some ways, that has been contained. Again, I'm not condoning them. But then again, after so many attacks, if there are two individuals have killed, one of them police, who belongs to minority, we need to put it in context and perspective too, right? But most important challenge for the stability is coming because the absence of the law enforcement agencies, particularly police. What happened is the police have been so much politicized that after the demise or the departure of Sheikh Hasina, they have left their post. Many police stations were banned, and they're not coming back. Not only they're coming back, what happened is they have become, some of them are so loyal to the deposed regime, they're not working at this point, even if they show up. The administration is in a very weak situation because layers after layers, the party loyalists have been appointed. So you take one layer of them, tell them to become officer on special duty. The next layer is nothing but basically the same kind of people. Economy has been decimated in the fashion that practically it has been bankrupted. So all these things, these things, the stability's challenge is also coming from those who were connected to the previous regime. They are trying to strike back to prove that this government is ineffective and it is not going to work. And unfortunately, former dictator Sheikh Hasina, sitting in India, actually somewhat inspiring this kind of things. So stability is the immediate challenge. This is the immediate challenge. Today's, yesterday's challenge, tomorrow's challenge that this government is facing. But there are larger challenges, the reason that I'm saying what would happen to Bangladesh. Three areas are most important that they will have to face. First of all is the economy. Because the economy, the kleptocracy that was established has bankrupted Bangladesh. How much it has bankrupted? It has practically looted the future of Bangladesh, not only the past. Look, what happened, I give two examples, yesterday and today's example, then you would understand. Treaty was signed with an Indian company called Adani. The treaty was signed, it didn't go through the formal process because Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina insisted that they should not go through the process. And now, since the payments were not made, Adani has written a letter to Professor Yunus that they need to get their money. The rate and everything, if you have read Washington Post months ago, you would have known that the Adani has got a deal which is basically unfair is an understatement. And then now the Russians are asking for money for the Rupur nuclear energy project. In the last 24 hours, what I gathered is that they have sent it to. You can understand what they have done. The banks are pretty much. So the economy is the major challenge that they are facing. They have to fix it. How do you fix those banking sector is a major, because at least 25 major houses have taken money which they have not returned. Default, non-performing loan, as it is usually the economists describe, defaulting. Being a layman, I call them looting, basically. I don't understand these economic terms. I simply call them looting the people's money. That's what has happened. Asylum Group and Beximco and others have done it. And they have done it for a decade and a half. So economy has to be fixed. How do you fix this economy at a time when it is not only your day-to-day expenditure, it is how you address this when you are being pressured by Adani, who happens to be very close to Prime Minister Modi of India, as we know. Even something is happening in Kenya in the last 3 weeks about the Adani project, And then the Russians are coming, and there are others that would come because all this money. So this is the first challenge. How do you fix the economy? But 2 more challenges are more prominent to me from the political point of view. One is election. Everyone thinks that like 2007, 1991, 1996, when there were quote-unquote caretaker government. This is not a caretaker government. It is an interim government. There is a significant difference between these two. This interim government, everyone, political parties, of course, are expecting that there will be an election soon. Can there be an election as it is? My understanding is that it cannot be. They have to fix the constitution. Not only fixing the constitution, I have suggested in my recent trip to Dhaka that the constitution needs to be rewritten. Why? Because if you look at Bangladeshi constitution, it has been over the last years, particularly with all these amendments that has been done since 2009, it has become a tool for autocratic rule. Personalistic autocracy would emerge out of it, because with all the criticism of the despot Sheikh Hasina, what is very interesting that she actually operated within the Bangladeshi constitution. All the powers that she grabbed is basically, of course, her party has given, making her invincible, making her looking in that she's the everything. She has been described as Iron Lady of Asia, so on and so forth. But her power that she gathered was within the constitution. The constitution allowed her to become an autocrat, a personalistic autocrat. So if you continue with this constitution, there is always a door that will remain open for the emergence of another autocracy. Bangladeshis have endured it. The movement that was spearheaded by the students demanded not only the reform of the quota. When the transition took place, they have said very clearly they want a new and different political settlement. Whether that political settlement can be done, a new political settlement can emerge out of this, keeping this constitution as it is. I'm not only skeptic, I'm pretty sure that that cannot be done. How this government is going to address it, this is the challenge that they will have to face. Either they can just simply go into an election, which, by the way, would be very difficult for them. You know why? Because Article 7 of Bangladesh Constitution, as it is written, practically tells that those who are in the power have committed treason. I'm not making it up. Article 7 of Bangladesh Constitution, as it is written, says that anyone who captures power beyond the constitutional means are liable to be tried and can be hanged, executed. They would be considered as treason. So if you keep this constitution, can you just simply take away one? No. The judiciary, which has served the previous regime, like anything that you can think of. Article 116 of Bangladesh Constitution has given power to Prime Minister. I say Prime Minister, it is written that it is President, but there is another clause which says that President cannot do anything without the consent of the Prime Minister, which means basically Prime Minister has the control over judiciary, Prime Minister has control over the legislative body, Prime Minister has the control over the executive. What would result? An autocrat. That is what we have seen. So how can you actually have an election when your own legitimacy can be questioned? Some are raising this question whether the Professor Yunus's interim government has legitimacy. I say that no, don't ask that question, because you are practically, what you are doing is challenging, questioning the legitimacy in the sense of these people who have died. People who have died. This government's legitimacy does not lie in the constitution as it is written. The legitimacy of this government lies in the blood and sweat of those students and the people. They have created the legitimacy. Can they go back without making that change, which is absolutely necessary for a Bangladeshi state? They cannot. They shouldn't. So how do they resolve that question? This is a major challenge. They have created a commission. They have appointed a commission for the constitution. There are other commissions they have set up. But I think the constitution question is an important one. The second most important, one of the most important challenge is the trial of those who have committed crimes against humanity. I'm not saying lightly, crimes against humanity. Sheikh Hasina has the command responsibility for killing 800 plus people, 18,000 people. She has the command responsibility. Anyone who is familiar with the genocide studies would agree with me that you cannot let someone go who has the command responsibility. And she was not alone. Her party Secretary General Obaidul Qadir, who unleashed publicly, said that people will be shot on sight. Her home minister, where video has emerged when he is watching that the police is describing that, yes, we shoot these people, one gets killed, but the rest of the people stood, firmly against us. And he didn't react. This is called command responsibility. Command responsibility goes with the law minister. Because knowing well that the police and all law enforcement agencies were acting unlawfully, he neither acted against those nor he raised any question. Rather, he supported those. So there are people who have command responsibility of killing 800 people. Some are calling it genocide. I don't. I call it massacre. I call it atrocities. But that does not demean or diminish the importance of it. How this government is going to deal with that. There are three possibilities, there are three pathways. One is the International Crimes Tribunal within Bangladesh, which was established in 2010. And there are some reservations from the international community, as well as I have personally expressed some, questions with that ICT, even when it was trying those who committed crimes against humanity in 1971. During the War of Independence, because of their procedural issue. They will have to fix those kind of things. And most importantly, one of the critical elements of this ICT is that it has the capacity, it has the ability to have capital punishment. I am opposed to capital punishment, and the international community would not actually go with such kind of a thing. So that is number one. That is one option. Second option is to send these people to International Criminal Court, ICC. There are ways to do it, despite the fact the government not unwilling. Even the willing government can send them. And how that can be done, we can go into the details. The third is a hybrid model that we have seen in Cambodia and other places. But in some form or other, this government, however many days and weeks and months they stay in power, they will have to get this done. There is no other way, because they not only owe it to the people who have died, who have been injured, who have suffered over the last 15 years, not only 36 days, 36 days have made it possible to take down Sheikh Hasina, but there is a background of 15 years of oppression, 15 years of suffering. So this is the kind of challenges it faces. On the one hand, these are immediate challenges. There are the economic challenges. I'm glad to see that some of the people, very competent people, have been put in place, in charge, and they're doing a very good job in terms of bringing back, some of the monies that has been siphoned off from Bangladesh. But two major political questions is hanging there. One is, what do you do with the constitution? The second thing, what do you do with it? There have been cases filed in ICT, there have been cases filed against Sheikh Hasina and others. Some of them, I would say, is not exactly very strong, but the state at some point will have to make the decision how they are going to treat. There is another aspect to it, given that Sheikh Hasina is now in India. Her visa would end on 20th of September, by my count. Today is what? We're talking 11, 12. 7 more days. 7 more days. Then India will have to make a decision. Is she going to get a, political asylum there? If not, how India is going to treat this one. Indian media's behavior is, many of you are familiar by now, what they are doing, trying to have a misinformation campaign, deliberate misinformation campaign. But most important to me, the Indian government's decision. The reason I say that one, I have studied, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm in Harvard after all, please correct me. I've studied the rise and fall of autocrats, and it's not a commercial. I have a book called How the Autocrats Rise. I mean, you don't have to buy it, but anyway, I will take this opportunity to, make a sales speech. And this, in working with my student, we have looked into it, that how autocrats rise and how autocrats fall. I haven't found in last 50 years a single instance that when an autocrat flees country, his or her country, mostly his country, and go to another country to take refuge, any government official goes there to receive that person. It hasn't happened, except in case of Sheikh Hasina. Ajit Doval came and received her. This was a message. Given that she would be there, how she is going to behave, whether Indian government would, there are a treaty that would allow India to hand her over to Bangladesh if Bangladesh wants it. There are clauses also, exit clause as I call it, is that India can decline, because if it is a political nature, then India might actually decline. But the problem is here. Previously, India did own political ground, asked, and Bangladesh did handed over some of the Northeast Indian rebel leaders, insurgent leaders. So what would India do with respect to her? That has an implication for her trial. That has an implication for the stability of the country. So with all these situations, I see that this is a critical juncture, because it is not about whether Professor Yunus would survive in terms of next 3 months or 6 months, whether this government succeeds. The government's success is not only dependent on, and we should not be judging whether this government is succeeding in making sure the electricity is there. Previously, it was 4 hours of load shedding. Now it is 16 hours. So we should start, getting angry. My point is this. This is a very critical juncture about the Bangladeshi state. Let's see how it works, And personally, I hope they succeed, for the sake of 180 million people, but also for the sake of the regional stability, which I suppose Dan is going to talk about. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to the organizers. Thanks to my fellow panelists who have already teed up a fantastic conversation. And thanks to all of you. It's so nice to see such a big group of people interested in this topic. It was mentioned that I come from the U.S. Institute of Peace. And just a quick plug, if you're not familiar with us, we're in Washington, D.C. We're paid for by U.S. taxpayer dollars through the U.S. Congress. So we work for you. And we're interested in issues of peace and security. We have a large and growing team that works on South Asia. I have some fantastic colleagues, and we're particularly interested in issues having to do with India, but also Bangladesh and the wider region. So it's a real pleasure to be able to be here today and talk about this issue. I'm really not, unlike my fellow panelists who are real experts on Bangladesh. I tend to look at these issues in a sense from the outside in and at a regional and global level. And so I've been asked to speak to the implications of these dramatic events in Bangladesh. Events that I will say were not terribly well anticipated by anyone. including certainly in Washington, D.C., but in the region as well. And I want to briefly talk about some of the international drivers of these events, because we haven't spoken to those at all, and then also of the implications for the region. Now, to be clear, as has been the point has already been made, the drivers of what's happened in Bangladesh are principally domestic. And I think that's really worth recognizing. This is a series of events that have unfolded because of what Bangladeshis themselves have done. And yet the circumstances of them do have something to do with external factors as well. So we wouldn't, I think, have had a Sheikh Hasina regime in place for quite so long, for 15 years, if not for the degree of backing and support that she received from external partners, including India and including China, which is an interesting thing that we can explore. We wouldn't, I think, have had quite such a trend toward illiberalism and backsliding on democracy in a different era where we weren't seeing that kind of trend in many other parts of the world, and certainly in many other parts of South Asia. Part of what we're seeing here is a geopolitical competition, and we have to understand that that includes India and China, but also the United States. And so part of what's unfolded here has to do with that. We probably wouldn't have seen the pressures on Bangladesh in terms of its economy, its scarcities, if not for things like the war in Ukraine and the implications that that's had for global markets, commodities, the global economy writ large. And we probably, or we may not have seen quite the timing of this outcome, if not for some of the external pressure, including from the United States, and criticism about the Sheikh Hasina Awami League regime, which took place in the lead up to elections last year. So all of these are external factors, but I think we need to be careful. None of them is necessary. Certainly none were sufficient to bring about these events. They really did come about by the actions of Bangladeshis, including Bangladeshi students. So let's get to the implications. And here too, most of what matters from what has unfolded will matter for Bangladeshis. So we should be clear, the principal story is internal. But Bangladesh is a large country, and it does play a role in regional and global affairs. We can think even just about things as narrow as its involvement in peacekeeping operations globally, its contributions there, its exports to major markets, including the United States. But Bangladesh is not a major geopolitical actor in its own right. I mean, imagine if this series of events had unfolded in a different country, say in Russia, and the kinds of conversations we'd be having about its effects for the region and the world. We would be that much more focused on these issues. Bangladesh is no Russia, and to its credit, Bangladesh has focused more on what's happening inside of Bangladesh than on projecting its power externally. So in some ways that's a good thing, but I think it tells us that Bangladesh is, though its events will have implications for the region and the world, they will be less acute and there will be less focus, there will be less priority placed on Bangladesh than if it were a different country or a different type of country. But it's India, which has already come up, which will feel the events or the effects, the implications most acutely from what's happening in Bangladesh. India was most invested in Sheikh Hasina as a valued partner, as a trusted and loyal partner, as a partner who would pay deference to India's interests, as a partner who would not permit China or Pakistan to have too much power or influence inside of Bangladesh. It is India that fears the potential rise of, from their perspective, an Islamist style politics in Bangladesh. It is India that is most concerned about what happens in Bangladesh affecting what happens in India's northeast in terms of separatist movements there. It is India that is most concerned about what happens with this new government, however it takes shape, and its relations with perhaps too close with China. It was India that Sheikh Hasina was working with most effectively in some fairly ambitious efforts at trans-regional connectivity, linking up markets and peoples across Bangladesh from east to west, connecting parts of India that have been in some ways disconnected for many decades. And with all of this in mind, recently we had some conversations with Indian experts. It's not terribly surprising, or it may from this perspective not be surprising, to imagine that in New Delhi, many have seen the past 15 years as something of a golden era in India-Bangladesh relations, as a moment of, or a period of opportunity, of comfort between New Delhi and Dhaka, of trust and confidence. And so even if this moment has been a surprise and has brought about all kinds of uncertainty for India, some in India would say perhaps that was a worthwhile outcome. In other words, the 15 years of a golden era, we're now reaping the consequences, but those were 15 good years. So it's important to keep that context in mind. Looking forward, I think India's goal, sort of in terms of its priorities, is to somehow find a solid working relationship with whatever emerges in Dhaka as a ruling government. India will continue to be concerned about the same types of top interests that it pursued with Sheikh Hasina's government. These include this issue of the security of India's northeast, of concerns about terrorist or the potential rise of terrorist organizations that India would have to fight on its own, of concerns about Chinese presence, Chinese military presence even, in Bangladeshi ports, and other potential Chinese infrastructure that might be turned to Beijing's influence or interest. India will continue to have economic concerns in Bangladesh, continue to want to see the possibility of crossing Bangladesh or connecting Bangladesh with more transit and trade infrastructure, knitting together the markets of Bangladesh and India, building out infrastructure projects that India has already invested in, and resolving potentially some of the disputes, particularly on water, that it's had. These are areas that India will want to continue to pursue. And politically, this government in India especially, but any government in India, will be concerned about Hindu minorities in Bangladesh and protecting them from its perspective from threats there. And of course, as I said before, keeping Chinese influence out, but also equally, if not more so, keeping Pakistani influence out of Bangladesh. So that's an Indian perspective. Let me shift now to the US. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. normally. That's what I focus on most. Here, if we look back at the period over the past year at US priorities, we'll see that Washington and policymakers there, plus our embassy in Dhaka, perceive that Bangladesh's authoritarian turn, its increasing illiberalism and anti-democratic practices, were bad for the country, and certainly bad for the US relationship, and were likely to end poorly. That is not to say that they foresaw precisely what would happen, but they didn't think this would end well. But at the same time, they had a real reluctance, and you could hear this in the policy debates in Washington, a real reluctance to test the bounds of US influence in Bangladesh. They recognized there was only so much that Washington could do, that certain types of policies, including sanctions policies, if brought to Bangladesh too broadly, might actually make a bad situation worse, would hurt the citizens of Bangladesh more than they would help the politics of Bangladesh. They recognized that the United States has other geopolitical interests in the region, that it wouldn't want to hand Bangladesh, in a sense, to Chinese influence, or to do too much to undermine India's interests in the region, given that the United States has a strong and growing strategic partnership with New Delhi. And Washington, I think, to be clear, did not perceive that there were great alternative political parties or options on the table at the time, all through this period. Didn't look around and say, this would be a better horse to back. Instead, saw a series of not terribly good options. And so that kept US pro-democracy policies, I think, pretty limited throughout this cycle. And it certainly frustrated a number of Bangladeshis who thought the United States should have done more. But there's no evidence that I can find of any serious US political interference in what has happened in Bangladesh. As I say, this is a domestic development. This is not driven by the United States. And I say that in part because of the conspiracy theories that have been hatched in other parts of the region, which are suggesting that it's really something driven by the Americans. And that gets me to this really fascinating debate between the United States and India on the topic of Bangladesh, because I think this has been a real bone of contention and an area of mistrust in the US-India relationship. So going back, as I said, the United States felt that more should have been done prior in the lead up to Bangladesh's elections to support a more democratic process, and would have liked India to think so as well. India did not. From India's perspective, they repeatedly and publicly said that the United States was more or less misinformed or misunderstood the politics of Bangladesh, and that the choices in Bangladesh were really between continued Awami League rule or something much worse, Islamist terrorism or Chinese influence, and that the US pro-democratic activities were actually counterproductive. This was the message that we tended to get from Indian interlocutors. So in other words, the United States was wrong-headed in its approach leading into the elections. Now, closer to the elections and soon thereafter, I would say the United States definitely eased off. And in some ways, recognized that the efforts that they were making, some limited sanctions and so on, against Bangladeshi actors for steps against democracy, weren't having much traction. They weren't doing much good. They were getting the United States more crosswise with New Delhi in an important relationship, and the United States decided to pull back from its coercive, even limited coercive approach in Bangladesh. Now this, to be clear, was never an explicit endorsement of Sheikh Hasina or the government there or of its politics. It was just a sort of a bow to what seemed like an intractable political reality. The United States saw no other options. India took the shift in US policy, was very pleased by it, and framed it as the United States basically accepting India's stance on Bangladesh, and has said so more or less publicly. But now, sort of in retrospect, with Sheikh Hasina out of the country, there are some in Washington, D.C. who are saying to the Indian side, look, we told you so. We told you that this would end poorly. If only you had listened to us, perhaps it would have ended in a way that was a softer landing for Indian interests. So that's one perspective. Some in New Delhi are saying, perhaps if the United States hadn't even done, as I said before, hadn't done what limited pressure it did on Bangladesh, perhaps none of this would have happened at all, blaming the United States. While others are saying, to the extent that the United States was involved, it was probably more a matter of tipping the scales against Sheikh Hasina, not fundamentally altering the situation. And now they expect that India will find a way to pick up the pieces. Now, let me take this forward a little bit. If we think about how this will go into the future in terms of the US-India relationship, I think there is a question as to whether the United States and India can coordinate or cooperate going forward to remove some of this mistrust and actually to be constructive in their approach. I mean, both sides do have some common interests. Both sides are concerned about Chinese influence in Bangladesh. Both sides more or less would rather see a more democratic rather than less democratic Bangladesh. And the combination of US and Indian influence in Bangladesh could conceivably be quite powerful. And without Sheikh Hasina herself involved, an individual who had deep distrust of Washington and close ties to India, whoever goes forward in this interim government or otherwise, could conceivably work well with both Washington and New Delhi. But there are problems, and I don't think we should sugarcoat those. It is clear that India would much prefer to have the United States be a kind of a silent partner in Bangladesh, a junior partner, to more or less carry India's water in Bangladesh. And the United States has been made aware, certainly from conversations with Bangladeshis, that tying itself too closely to India, being perceived as India's partner, diminishes Washington's popularity in Bangladesh itself, can actually be radioactive to US interests. So what would I expect? I'd expect there will be continued quiet coordination between Washington and New Delhi on Bangladesh policy. This will mainly happen behind the scenes in diplomatic consultations. There will be a fair amount of constructive overlap between the two, and I think there will be some positive sides to it. But I think we will still see that there are some significant differences. The United States will still be more focused on the democratic process, and although the reform word is not one that you would use, to try to bring about a reformed system or transformed system, one that would be more effective going forward. Whereas India, I think, will be much more concerned about its core material interests. And so those differences will persist. All right, I want to move quickly now to the China side of the story, because I think it's important to clear up a few things about China's interest in Bangladesh. First of all, China, like India, was perfectly happy with Sheikh Hasina as a partner. And I say this in part because there are, again, conspiracy theories suggesting that the Chinese, were partially responsible for pushing Sheikh Hasina out the door. They were otherwise involved in this process. They were not. They were perfectly happy to work with her. And China's activities in Bangladesh, if anything, look pretty similar to how China behaves in many countries around the world. In other words, it has looked to expand its commercial ties, its trade, its loans, its investments. All of these are things that China has done pretty much everywhere else as well. And then opportunistically, when possible, to take advantage of those pre-existing economic ties to pursue other political and even military aims. Now, when successful, China ends up in a position where it's basically working well with every part of other countries. And in this case, I think it was successfully working with many different segments of Bangladeshi society, not just Sheikh Hasina's government. And so we saw bilateral trade growing significantly over the past decade, major investment, Bangladesh involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, all kinds of infrastructure, major infrastructure projects with Chinese involvement, major loans. China's the third largest creditor in Bangladesh. So given all of this involvement, China has also found itself well positioned to extract certain benefits from Bangladesh, from its relationship. So it's gotten statements on Taiwan, for instance, out of this, like it has in many other countries. Bangladesh's involvement, not just in the BRI, but in what's called a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership with Beijing. Major arms sales. Bangladesh is a major purchaser of Chinese arms. And looking forward, there was some question as to whether Bangladeshi ports, including Chinese-built port with partially built port with Bangladeshi subs, would become available, open to direct Chinese involvement. Now, some may argue that going forward, the BNP may be sort of friendlier with the Chinese if they were to come to power. And there are real questions about whether the BNP will come to power, so I can't speculate there. But I would say, in conversations with BNP while out of power, they were just as interested as forging ties with the United States, more close partnership with the United States, or at least they said that as much as they might be with China. So I think that's a unclear story, at least right now. And all told, if we look at sort of China's perspective, they can't help but see the current moment as both an opportunity and a challenge, right? There is the challenge that this interim regime seems to be quite Western-oriented and have good relations with the United States. There's all kinds of uncertainties about what will be brought in anything that comes after for Chinese interests. But this very turmoil creates opportunities for China's influence and interests, particularly its involvement with specific Bangladeshi leaders and so on, to cultivate that and to push its advantage into the future. All right, so where does this leave Bangladesh? Let me wrap up here. Bangladesh will be in what appears to be a permanent balancing act, a geopolitical balancing act in the region with all of the three partners, and I haven't even talked about Pakistan, but Pakistan as well. And it will have to do so because Bangladesh's core interest is to maintain a degree of sovereign autonomy and authority, to sort of stiff-arm the competing interests of these external players and to maintain that space for it to make its own decisions. Bangladesh will have to continue to recognize, as I think it will, that getting too engaged in geopolitical competition in any particular direction, tilting any particular way, will be a very costly distraction for a developing country that has many other challenges at hand and cannot afford to play these games. So the goal is to minimally satisfy all of these competing players in ways that will keep them more or less out and allow Bangladesh to pursue its own future. This is a very difficult task. And the question that I would leave you with, and I'd be curious what my fellow panelists will have to say about this, is the extent to which a Bangladesh in political turmoil, a Bangladesh that may see factionalization, fractions, all kinds of different competing political groups within, how capable will such a Bangladesh be at playing that game of geopolitical balance? Will it be better at doing so than the Sheikh Hasina government was? Will it be more transparent, more accountable to the actual interests of its people? Or will it find itself more beholden to external influences, more riven by them, and therefore more pulled apart by its region and global geopolitics in ways that would be quite dangerous, I think, going forward? That's another open question. So I'll leave it there. Look forward to the conversation.
We've got about, looks like 20 minutes. I'll pose one question that I'd love to hear the panelists reflect on, and then we'll open up to a broader Q&A since we have such a large audience. So maybe we'll keep these answers a bit on the shorter end so we can hear from everyone. So you know, in this conversation, a lot of key actors have come up in this process, you know, from the youth to the, you know, the existing BNP that's, you know, waiting to see what will happen with elections, to the broader Bangladeshi society and, you know, the international community. And you've highlighted a couple key areas to look to as we move forward, you know, the Constitution, you know, efforts for trials and accountability, and, you know, what will happen in the economic space. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you think some of those actors are viewing the priority areas of these particular spaces, and what exactly is kind of their key goal in some of these spaces. Yeah, sure.
Briefly speaking, okay. Briefly speaking, first of all, insofar as all the actors are concerned, and one of the major actors that we have not talked about is the military, because it has played a significant role in the transition process. It didn't take over, but it did play a significant role in the transition, because military has created that window for Sheikh Hasina to leave the country, or flee the country would be the right word.
It also didn't shoot at students after a point, right? It didn't shoot at students. That's also true.
Absolutely. Excuse me. If it had taken that position, that would have been a catastrophe. Yeah. So taking that, what would be their role going forward is a very, very important question that we have not touched. But insofar as the other political actors are concerned, basically, economy parties pretty much agreed, everyone, that this government should clean it up so that they don't inherit it, whether you are talking to BNP or any other political party, that they would like to see that this being cleaned up. And they will have to do it quickly, because otherwise it would be very difficult going forward. With respect to these two other issues, you know, they would like to see it done quickly. First of all, the trial, for example. I mean, all political parties would like to see it done by this government, because otherwise it would be seen as vengeance rather than justice. And with respect to the constitution issue, the point is, you know, it's not yet agreed as to what would be the way forward. They have created a commission, it has not started. But most importantly, the debate didn't start until, I would say, about 10 days ago. You know, that what is the way forward? Everyone thought in the typical sense that, oh, there will be some, you know, amendments, reform, and so on and so forth. But over the last 10 days or so, those things have changed, that whether a rewriting is necessary or not, that has come up. So that would determine the pathway going forward.
I'll just make a very quick observation that when you talk about actors, if I look at the three actors that I mentioned, in particular, India, the US, and China, if they were to prioritize, I think India would put security at the top of its list. I think the United States would put politics and geopolitics at the top of its list. And I think China would put economics at the top of its list. So the differentiation of priorities for these three actors, I think, tells you a lot. If you're thinking very simplistically about how they approach Bangladesh, this helps to explain, if you wanted a starting point, I think that's a good one.
If I can, talk about something that's really, on the ground is the student as a political actor, right? And of course, it's not surprising. Most of the kind of successful political movements that happened in independent Bangladesh and even before were led by students in many ways, and then ordinary citizens joined them. But there's a way in which the student as a political actor emerged in this uprising, maybe because the quota reforms, because the main reason was something that affected the students directly, but also the students have been able to accomplish something that veteran political parties haven't been able to for a long time, right? And in many ways, it has also created some problems. I mean, as much as people are celebrating this kind of power of the youth, it has created tensions. For example, when the police were not coming back and the students were managing the traffic, and then the police were coming back, there was tension because you were kind of doing things that you're not supposed to do, but at the same time they were also celebrated, but nobody could say anything to the students, right? And I think in the last speech, Muhammad Yunus told students, it's time to go back to school, right? But I think in some ways, the kind of power that they have unleashed, I think it would be interesting to see whether that power can be harnessed in a way that is more predictable. Because I feel like at this point things are still so volatile that it would be difficult to dismiss that kind of power of the youth, right? But also it's interesting that people are not really talking about this as power of the youth. You will hear a lot of talk about Gen Z, right? That this is a Gen Z revolution or Gen Z uprising, whatever. I mean, when Noor Hussain was killed in 1990, he was also this similar age. It's just that these categories were not there. And of course, Gen Z has also generated hundreds of memes. One of the funnier ones I thought was when there's one where Sheikh Hasina is saying, it's not my fault. They kept saying Gen Z, Gen Z. I thought they were talking about General Zia, right? So there is this kind of incomprehension, a kind of generational incomprehension that I think is symptomatic, that a lot of people don't really understand the irreverence, right? So I think it would be problematic to dismiss that power that has been unleashed.
Well, thank you. So let's open up to questions, and it looks like we have a mic. So
Should we collect a few questions at once? Maybe we do one round and see if we can fit in another. Feyaad, you pointed out.
yeah, let's do one here, one up there. Yes.
Thank you so much. Just before I make my question, one thing I need to, and it's a part of question too, about the economy and the development. So one of the reasons that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was in the power for last 15 years has been and it is also recognized by the international media as well as the development partners, that Bangladesh has made significant economic development. They came out to the level of from developing nations to the middle income countries. At the same time, taking out people out of poverty 25% or more, as well as many other developments. Now, so that's one of the things that, and corruption, siphoning of money, other things happened, but development was a big issue, keeping Prime Minister into the power. Another thing is that while we say that this movement, of course, wasn't apolitical, was not about political things, but there is a big part should we also consider about the political aspect of it. For example, while we say the students, a big part of the students actually, if not the major part, is from the non-conventional academic institutes. Okay, so how, and they are all, many of them are affiliated with the political parties. So like how you differentiate between these things. And that's one of the geopolitical questions now come into the questions about where Bangladesh goes from here. And we have noticed it also with Professor Yunus meeting almost every other day with all these Islamic parties and many of the fundamentalist parties together. So that comes. Now my question, last part is like the difficulty of India. In last 15 years, like India has supported this government, but at the same time, while we see the frustration among the citizens and of Bangladesh, that was towards the government, but a big part was also against India and its role towards Bangladesh, as well as towards the party government. The reason being, did India play its role, or how much did it play its role in coming up to this situation where people became so frustrated, not only with the government as well as with India? Then comes my question: is that while we say that now India is going to be India, China, US, all of them have their interest into Bangladesh now. How it could be balanced when US wants to play its geopolitical roles into Bangladesh, even though China's goal is for the economic development and economy, but when it sees US and India coming for these geopolitical roles, will it keep quiet or not get involved? Thank you.
So we got a lot of questions there. So
Everyone should say who they are so we all know.
my name is Iqbal Yusuf, and I have I'm the executive director of my own Sustainable Development Institute.
Let's try and keep questions a little briefer just so we can get more from the audience. But Feyaad, up next.
let's have one in the front here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was such an exciting panel. I'm Sarza Yasmin. I work for the Bangladesh Project at the Kennedy School. So my question is about India's fear of rising Islamism in Bangladesh. I mean, historically, religion has not been weaponized or politicized in Bangladesh to the extent that it has been politicized in India. For example, rise of the Hindu right wing, or the way Pakistan operates on its brand of Islam. So my question is actually for Professor Ali Riaz, because this is actually his work. How legitimate is this fear? Second question, if all of you could touch upon a little bit on the future of party politics in Bangladesh, because we know during Awami League's time, BNP's whatever semblance of infrastructure it had has been completely depleted. So do you foresee similar depletion for Awami League and possibilities of third or fourth party? Thank you.
And then
Let's just take one more, and then
you want to do it from another section over here? All right, one from over here. Anyone? If not, here we are.
Yeah, I completely agree with Professor Ali Riaz's comment about Bangladesh is at a critical juncture. So my question would be, how would you say, or how would you advise the government to reevaluate the trade deals that has already happened? For example, like the Matharberry coal plant deal with JICA, that is like very environmentally damaging for Bangladesh, but that is already underway. Or like the extortive energy deal with Adani Group, which is also like very like costly for Bangladesh and is like not fair at all. So how would you advise Dr. Yunus to renegotiate these deals as they proceed? Oh, I'm Ahmed Fahim Shihab. I'm a sophomore at Harvard College. I'm from Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Okay, great. So let's just do a round of answers on this. We also have some time afterwards for chat. So let's see if we can get this round.
Let me try to be brief. Renegotiating the trade deals that you are suggesting, at this point, I don't think this government would be able to do it in such a quick manner. It will have to be left for the next government, whatever the elected government comes, or if this government continues beyond a year or so. Their priority at this point, to my understanding, economy, constitutional issues, as well as the trial of those who have committed crimes against humanity. Future of party politics, I don't think that it is going to be shaped or reshaped in a dramatic manner. Will Awami League return? I'm not sure the way Awami League behaved in last 15 years, particularly the way they have behaved between 15th of July and 5th of August. Their acceptability to a large Bangladeshi is going to happen soon. I don't think so. So it depends on whether Awami League thinks that they need to repent and somehow, address this issue. Third party, fourth party, there are other parties anyway. That is, $1 million question is with respect to the students. Are they going to form a political party? At this point, there are whispers, yes, and the next morning I hear another whisper, no. So it will depend on them whether they will make an appeal. India's fear of rising Islamism, how legitimate it is. The way it is being projected is actually exaggerated version of it. There is no doubt it is exaggerated. Are there Islamists in Bangladesh? Of course there are Islamists. It's a Muslim majority country. They will have Islamists. If there are Democrats, if there are quote-unquote secular political party, there will be Islamist political party. Then how much they will command, it depends on how much appeal they can make. Because at the end of the day, of the last 4 fairly held elections, the Islamist parties didn't do very well. People don't vote based on their ideology, rather they do it differently for various considerations. So I don't think that it is as much as it is projected by the Indian media at this point. With respect to how much role the India play in coming to this situation, let's consider that Russia has sent its foreign minister to decide whether we should vote, how we should vote, whether Democratic Party should participate in election or not. Would we consider it as an influence? Yes, we would. Exactly, that's what happened in 2013. Sujata Singh, the Foreign Secretary of India, went to Bangladesh when all the opposition parties decided to boycott and practically arm twisted former dictator General Ershad and his party. And he said it, I'm not making it up. While during the 32 hours visit of Sujata Singh, H.M. Ershad did a press conference, said that Sujata Singh is telling me to participate in election. That is the kind of influence they have actually exerted. This is just one example. What happened in Bangladesh, the people that now, why it has turned out to be, India out kind of thing? Because last 15 years, unless Dan's presentation has also made this point, the last 15 years, unequivocal, unqualified support to a dictator in Bangladesh, India has to take some blame for it. It has to. There's no way that it can simply skirt this. We did. Look, after 5th of August, Indian media has suddenly realized that there has been something going on. There is a country called Bangladesh and something is going on. Where have they been from 15th of July through 5th of August, until the morning of 5th of August? They're talking about the death of the Hindu minorities. Of course, that is deplorable. But between 15th of July and 5th of August, I know at least 5 Hindu students have been killed. Has that been mentioned in Indian media? No, they didn't. So that's why I say they've not only forgotten about Bangladesh until 5th of August. For last 15 years, that their role, India's, not only Indian media or the establishment, but also Indian intellectuals who claim to be Bangladesh experts, have played a role for creating a dictator that has actually taken lives and decimated the institutions. That part, however you put it, I cannot sugarcoat it. That is the fact.
Ask a counterfactual here. If India had not supported, this is Ashutosh Varshney. If India had not supported Sheikh Hasina for 15 years, is your claim, counterfactual claim, we can't prove it, it's a counterfactual but worth speculating, would Sheikh Hasina have fallen on her own without India's support?
As a matter of fact, let me be very frank.
Yeah.
If we go back to 2014, And if there was a fair election, the Awami League would have, in all likelihood, have lost, but would not be decimated like this. She would not have to flee the country. That I can tell you. And if 2014, even in 2018, that situation has been created in 2024, that she has no other place but to flee and flee to India, But if it was 2014, again, as you and I know, it's counterfactual. We cannot, neither of us can prove it. But I can say it with a little bit certainty, that more than speculation, that if 2014 had a fair election, yes, BNP might have emerged as the as the majority, but Awami League wouldn't have done very bad, because there are things that they could claim that they have done.
But even in 2018, there were talks within the party where some people said they really didn't need to rig it so badly, because the 2018 election is infamous for filling the ballot boxes the night before, and it was so blatant that even some of the senior people within the party were saying, BNP was already kind of not very popular at that point because they haven't been able to do anything, that Awami League would have probably won. They didn't even need to do that level of corruption, right? So it was just, but I just wanted to go back to the question about students not being apolitical. I think it's a complete fantasy, because in all Bangladeshi, at least public institutions of higher education, student politics means student party politics. So when the students are claiming that this is post-ideological, apolitical, they're saying that, and I remember watching this press conference, one of the coordinators were saying that if you want to join us as a student, not as a representative of a political party. That doesn't mean that they're not affiliated with a political party, but at that moment, their primary identity was that of a student. And of course, when the situation was created as such by the students, of course, political activists joined. I mean, otherwise there wouldn't be, hundreds and thousands of people. So it's not kind of a fantasy of some kind of a pure apolitical coalition, right? But it's like at that moment, for ordinary people to kind of come in support of them, it had to be beyond party politics. That doesn't mean that the people who were there didn't have party political affiliation.
Just wanted to pick up on the question about China and how it would play this game. Look, I think it's all speculative. We don't know exactly, but I think it's worth looking at how China plays in other contexts. And here it's typically the power of attraction. That is, China has a lot to offer, right? As I've already pointed out, whether it's loans or infrastructure investment or trade and so on. So China can afford to be the attractive external partner without which Bangladesh really can't get along economically in the way that it should, just like many other countries around the world, nearly all countries. And so I think China can rely on that as the foundation, and then, as I suggested, play the game opportunistically. Look for opportunities going forward to curry favor and interest with those who do rise to the top of Bangladeshi politics, to protect and project its other interests, which may emerge and continue to be relevant to China over time. And here, India's greatest concern is China's involvement in ports and China's involvement in Bangladesh's military. And so if it can play the attractive game in the short term, looking for opportunities to take advantage of interests going forward, I think that's exactly how it would do it. And that would be the wise way to go, because China would need to recognize that it isn't the preponderant power in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is literally or almost entirely surrounded by India. And so China has to play this cleverly. And the last point I will make is, as one of my colleagues at USIP pointed out, Bangladesh is not China's top priority. And though we're here to talk about Bangladesh, we need to recognize that China has many other things on its mind, and Bangladesh is in some ways more of a secondary or tertiary concern for it, and needs to be put in that context as well.
Great. So in the interest of time, I wish we had time for more questions, but we'll have to wrap up. But we do have samosa and chai outside, so please join us for that. But thank you to our three wonderful panelists. Everyone should join me in thanking them.
Thank you.